The war was doomed. Then the humans showed up. Commander Zexhai pressed her scaled palms against the tactical display, watching red markers advance across the star map like a spreading plague. The Vorthon Empire's war machine rolled forward with mechanical precision, consuming system after system. Her own forces retreated in broken formations, leaving behind smoking worlds and shattered dreams. The coalition of free worlds was dying. "How many ships do we have left?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Lieutenant Yorax, a young Kalani with barely developed wing membranes, consulted his datapad with trembling fingers. 14 cruisers, 38 destroyers, and maybe 200 fighters spread across 7 systems, Commander. The Vorthans have, well, they have everything else. Zexhai's throat sac inflated with bitter laughter. Everything else indeed. 3,000 warships, orbital bombardment platforms, and manufacturing facilities that could replace their losses faster than the Coalition could count them. The Vorthon war doctrine was simple and effective. Overwhelm with superior numbers, crush resistance with concentrated firepower, then strip mine the conquered worlds for resources to fuel the next campaign. It had worked flawlessly for 3 centuries. No species had ever successfully resisted the Vorthon expansion once it began in earnest. The Kalani had tried and failed. The proud Thaxian warrior clans had made their last stand at the Battle of 7 Moons and been annihilated to the last warrior. Even the technologically advanced Zephyrians, with their energy shields and quantum torpedoes, had been ground down through sheer attrition. Now it was the Coalition's turn to face extinction. "Signal from the Nexus Station, Commander," called out Communications Officer Brill, her chitinous fingers dancing across holographic controls. "Admiral Voss wants to speak with all remaining fleet commanders." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the weathered face of Admiral Marcus Voss. The old Terran looked exhausted, his gray hair disheveled and dark circles under his eyes. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship showed the barely controlled chaos of a military force in full retreat. "Commanders," Voss began, his voice rough with fatigue, "I'm not going to sugarcoat our situation. We're beaten. The Vorthon fleet will reach the Nexus system in 48 hours, and when they do, this war is over." Murmurs of despair rippled through the bridge crew. Zexhai felt her own hearts sinking. The Nexus system contained the Coalition's last major shipyards, their primary command center, and the homes of nearly 2 billion beings. If it fell, organized resistance would end. "However," Voss continued, and something in his tone made everyone stop and listen, "we've received an interesting transmission. It seems we're not alone in this fight after all." The screen split to show a new face, unmistakably human, but different from the few Terrans in the Coalition forces. This human was younger, with bright green eyes and an expression of barely contained excitement. Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Independent Navy. "Greetings, Coalition forces," Chen said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm here to inform you that the United Earth government has voted to join your cause. We're dispatching our entire available fleet to assist in the defense of free space." Zexhai felt her throat sac deflate. She respected humans. They were clever fighters and surprisingly adaptable for such a young species, but Earth was a single world with perhaps 100 ships at most. What could they possibly contribute against the Vorthon war machine? "With respect, Captain Chen," Admiral Voss said carefully, "we appreciate Earth's support, but our situation is dire. The Vorthons have overwhelming numerical superiority." Chen's smile was sharp as a plasma blade. "Admiral, you're thinking like someone who's never seen humans really angry. We've been watching this war from the sidelines, studying Vorthon tactics, learning their weaknesses. And we've been preparing." "Preparing how?" Zexhai found herself asking. "Let's just say that humanity has some unique perspectives on warfare," Chen replied. "We should arrive at Nexus Station in 36 hours. I suggest you gather all available forces there. This war isn't over yet." The transmission ended, leaving the coalition commanders staring at blank screens. Around Zexhi's bridge, the crew exchanged uncertain glances. Hope was a dangerous thing when facing extinction, but Chen's confidence had been infectious. "What do you think, Commander?" Lieutenant Yorax asked quietly. Zexhi studied the tactical display again. The Vorthon fleet advanced like a tidal wave of destruction, unstoppable and inevitable. But humanity had surprised the galaxy before. They were the only species to achieve faster-than-light travel without outside assistance. They'd solved the energy crisis that had plagued galactic civilization for millennia with their fusion technology. They'd even managed to maintain independence while every other young species had been absorbed into larger empires. Maybe, just maybe, they had one more surprise left. "Signal all coalition vessels," she ordered. "We're falling back to Nexus Station. If the humans want to make a last stand, we'll stand with them." 34 hours later, Zexhi watched from the bridge of her flagship as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace. What she saw made her question her own sensors. Instead of a handful of cruisers and destroyers, space filled with ships unlike anything in coalition databases. Sleek vessels with unusual configurations, bristling with weapon systems that defied easy classification, and there were hundreds of them. "Commander," Yorax whispered, his voice filled with awe, "I count 437 human vessels. They have more ships than our entire remaining fleet." But it wasn't just the numbers that caught Zexhi's attention. It was the way the human ships moved. Not in the rigid formations favored by every other spacefaring species, but in loose, fluid groups that seemed to dance through space. Their formations were chaotic, unpredictable, and somehow beautiful. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the communications channel. "Coalition forces, this is the Terran First Fleet. We're honored to fight alongside you. Admiral Voss, we're transmitting tactical data now. I think you'll find our approach interesting." As the data flowed across her screens, Zexhi felt her understanding of naval warfare being turned upside down. The humans didn't fight like anyone else. Where other species relied on massive ships with heavy armor and overwhelming firepower, the humans favored speed and unpredictability. Their vessels were smaller but faster, armed with weapons designed for precision strikes rather than brute force bombardment. Most shocking of all were their fighter craft. Coalition doctrine used fighters as scouts and harassment units. The Vorthans barely used them at all, preferring to rely on their capital ships' superior firepower. But the humans had turned fighter combat into an art form. Their pilots flew with a reckless creativity that would have been considered insane by any other species. "How do they coordinate such complex maneuvers?" Commander Thex of the Kalani Third Wing asked over the tactical channel. Chen's laugh was audible across the comm. "We don't, really. That's the point. Every human pilot is trained to think independently, to adapt on the fly, to take advantage of whatever opportunities present themselves. We call it controlled chaos." The concept was alien to every other species in the coalition. Military doctrine throughout the galaxy emphasized rigid command structures, predetermined battle plans, and overwhelming force applied at decisive points. The humans seemed to embrace randomness as a tactical advantage. "Vorthon fleet detected," announced the sensor operator. "Range, 2 light hours and closing. Estimated time to engagement, 4 hours. Zexhi felt the familiar cold weight of dread settle in her stomach. The Vorthon fleet was exactly as massive as intelligence had reported. Over 3,000 warships arranged in perfect battle formations. It was a force capable of sterilizing planets, and it was heading straight for them. "All coalition forces, this is Admiral Voss," came the announcement. "We'll make our stand here. If we fall, at least we'll fall fighting." "Actually, Admiral," Chen's voice cut in, "I'd like to suggest a different approach. Instead of waiting for them to come to us, why don't we go to them? The suggestion sent shocked murmurs through every coalition ship. Attack a force that outnumbered them 7-1? It was tactical suicide. Captain Chen, Admiral Voss said carefully, their numerical advantage is overwhelming. A direct assault would be exactly what they're not expecting, Chen finished. Commander HFY, how long have the Vorthons been expanding their empire? 312 years, HFY replied automatically. And in all that time, has any enemy ever launched a preemptive attack against a superior Vorthon force? HFY thought about it. No, never. Standard doctrine is to fortify defensive positions and make them pay for every system. Right. Which means they've never had to deal with an enemy that doesn't behave according to their tactical expectations. They're used to patient, predictable opponents who follow conventional military wisdom. Chen's plan unfolded across the tactical displays, and HFY found herself staring at something that violated every principle of space warfare she'd ever learned. Instead of forming a defensive line, the human fleet would scatter into dozens of small groups. Instead of protecting their heavy ships with screens of lighter vessels, they would send their most vulnerable units ahead as bait. Instead of concentrating their firepower, they would spread it across the entire battlefield. It was madness. It was also brilliant. The Vorthons have spent centuries perfecting tactics designed to counter conventional resistance, Chen explained. Their entire doctrine is built around engaging and destroying organized fleets in pitched battles. But what if there is no organized fleet to destroy? What if every ship becomes an independent threat, striking from unexpected angles? HFY studied the plan more carefully. It might actually work. The Vorthon fleet's strength lay in its ability to bring massive firepower to bear on concentrated targets. But their sensors and targeting systems were designed for tracking large formations, not hundreds of individual ships acting independently. It's insane, Admiral Voss said finally. Our ships aren't designed for independent operations. Our crews aren't trained for this kind of warfare. Then stay in reserve with your heavy units, Chen suggested. Use them as a hammer when we've created opportunities. This is what humans do, Admiral. We improvise. We adapt. We find ways to win fights we should lose. As the Vorthon fleet drew closer, HFY made her decision. Coalition vessels. This is Commander HFY. All ships capable of independent operation are to join the human attack. Remaining units will form a reserve force under Admiral Voss. Around her, the crew prepared for what might be their final battle. But for the first time in months, HFY felt something other than despair. The humans had brought more than ships and weapons. They'd brought hope, wrapped in chaos and tied with impossibility. The Vorthon Empire was about to face an enemy unlike any they'd ever encountered. An enemy that didn't follow the rules, didn't respect their superior numbers, and refused to accept that this war was already over. The tide was about to turn. Admiral Kothvar of the Vorthon Empire's Third Conquest Fleet studied the sensor readings with growing irritation. The coalition forces had done something unexpected. Instead of forming defensive positions around Nexus Station as doctrine demanded, they had scattered across local space like leaves in a storm. "What are they doing?" asked his tactical officer, Sub-Admiral Grex. The younger Vorthon's ridge scales were twitching with confusion. "This formation makes no sense. They've abandoned all defensive advantages." Kothvar's mandibles clicked in annoyance. 3 centuries of conquest had taught him to expect certain behaviors from defeated enemies. They would gather their remaining forces into a desperate last stand, usually around their most important installations. They would attempt to make the Vorthon Empire pay dearly for victory, hoping to negotiate better surrender terms. They followed the established patterns of warfare that had governed galactic conflict for millennia. But this scattered deployment defied all logic. The coalition ships were spread across several light minutes, moving in seemingly random patterns. Many appeared to be operating alone or in tiny groups of 2 or 3 vessels. It was tactical suicide. Isolated ships could be hunted down and destroyed piecemeal by concentrated Vorthon formations. "Sir," reported the sensor officer, "we're detecting significant human presence among the coalition forces. Intelligence indicates Earth has committed their entire fleet." Kothvar's interest sharpened. He'd read the reports about humans, a young species that had achieved remarkable technological advances despite their relative isolation. Their ships used unusual designs, and their crews showed surprising creativity in combat. But they were still newcomers to galactic warfare, lacking the experience that came from centuries of conflict. "How many human vessels?" he asked. "Approximately 400 ships, sir. Mixed classes, but all smaller than our heavy cruisers." Kothvar's mandibles spread in a predatory smile. 400 ships sounded impressive until compared to his own force of 3,000 vessels, including 200 massive dreadnoughts capable of sterilizing planets. The humans might be clever, but cleverness meant nothing against overwhelming firepower. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Maintain standard battle formation. We'll advance in 3 waves. First wave to engage scattered units, second wave to exploit gaps in their lines, third wave to finish any survivors. The humans want to fight like barbarians? We'll teach them the value of discipline." As the Vorthon fleet advanced, something strange began to happen. The scattered coalition ships didn't retreat or attempt to reform into defensive positions. Instead, they started moving toward the Vorthon formation, not in organized attack waves, but as individuals, each ship taking a different approach vector. "Sir," Sub-Admiral Grex said uncertainly, "they appear to be attacking us." "Impossible," Kothvar replied automatically. "No commander would order scattered units to attack a superior force." But the sensor displays told a different story. Hundreds of small ships were accelerating toward his fleet from dozens of different angles. Their approach patterns were chaotic, unpredictable, and completely unlike anything in Vorthon tactical databases. Some ships came in straight lines at maximum acceleration. Others followed curved paths that seemed to waste fuel and time. A few were actually spiraling as they advanced, spinning end over end in what looked like complete loss of control. "Weapons range in 30 seconds, reported the tactical officer. "All ships, prepare for—" Kothvar began, then stopped as the first wave of attackers reached engagement range. What followed challenged everything he thought he knew about space combat. The human ships didn't behave like any vessels he'd encountered. Instead of maintaining formation and concentrating firepower on priority targets, each ship seemed to be fighting its own personal war. They darted between his heavy cruisers like insects, too small and fast for effective targeting. Their weapons fired in rapid bursts rather than sustained bombardments, striking seemingly random targets before moving on to new ones. "Report!" Kothvar demanded, as alarms began sounding across his flagship. "Multiple hits on the forward screen," his damage control officer replied. "Minimal damage, but they're targeting our sensor arrays and communications relays." That was when Kothvar realized what the humans were doing. They weren't trying to destroy his ships. They were trying to blind and deafen them. Each precise strike took out another sensor cluster or communication dish. His massive fleet was slowly losing its ability to see and coordinate. "All ships, concentrated firepower on the attacking vessels," he ordered. But even as he spoke, he knew it was futile. His heavy weapons were designed to engage large targets at long range. The human ships were too small, too fast, and too close for effective targeting. "Sir, we're receiving multiple distress signals," Sub-Admiral Grex reported. "The Destroyer Squadron 7 reports engine failures. Cruiser Group 12 has lost primary sensors. The Dreadnought Inevitable Glory is showing massive system failures across multiple decks." Kothvar studied the tactical display with growing alarm. His fleet still vastly outnumbered the attackers, but the humans were somehow striking critical systems with surgical precision. How were they identifying weak points so quickly? How were they coordinating attacks on specific targets while maintaining such chaotic movement patterns? The answer came from an unexpected source. Captain Sarah Chen's voice crackled over open communication channels, speaking to her scattered fleet in what sounded like casual conversation. "Phoenix Wing, I see you've got a clear shot at that command cruiser's bridge tower. Mind taking it out?" "Copy that, Actual. Oh, and heads up, Razor Squadron found a weak spot in their shield generators. Lower port quarter, about 30 degrees off the engine nacelles." "Beautiful. All units, you heard that. Happy hunting." Kothvar's blood ran cold. The humans weren't just fighting chaotically. They were sharing real-time intelligence across their entire fleet while maintaining complete operational flexibility. Every pilot was an independent decision-maker, but they were all working toward common goals. It was organized chaos on a scale he'd never imagined possible. "Signal the reserve wings," he ordered. "Deploy fighter squadrons for close engagement." But when the Vorthon fighters launched, they found themselves facing something even more bewildering. Human fighter pilots didn't follow any recognizable tactical doctrine. They flew like madmen, pulling maneuvers that should have killed them from the acceleration alone. They used their own larger ships as cover, weaving between friendly vessels in patterns that seemed designed to give both sides targeting headaches. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're intercepting human fighter chatter." "Put it on speakers," Kothvar ordered, hoping to gain insight into their tactical planning. What he heard instead was a stream of incomprehensible banter that sounded more like playground taunting than military communication. "Woo! Did you see that cruiser light up? That's what happens when you mess with Earth." "Snake eyes, you've got 3 bogeys on your tail." "I see 'em. Hey, think I can thread the needle between those 2 destroyers?" "You're insane! That's why they pay me the big bucks. Watch this." Kothvar listened in growing disbelief as human pilots treated the battle like some kind of game. They celebrated successful attacks with whoops of joy, warned each other about dangers with casual familiarity, and seemed to be improvising tactics on the spot. It was the antithesis of professional military behavior, yet somehow it was working. His fleet was being systematically dismantled by what appeared to be organized anarchy. "Admiral," Sub-Admiral Grech said quietly, "perhaps we should consider retreat. Our losses are becoming significant, and we're not inflicting proportional casualties on the enemy." Retreat? The word stuck in Kothvar's throat like poison. No Vorthon fleet had ever retreated from an inferior force. The Empire's reputation for invincibility was built on 3 centuries of unbroken victories. To run from a handful of human upstarts would be unthinkable. But as he watched his carefully ordered battle lines dissolve into chaos, Kothvar began to understand why every other species had fallen to Vorthon might. They had all fought by the same rules, used the same tactics, made the same predictable choices. The humans weren't just fighting differently. They were fighting as if the rules didn't exist. "Sir, the Coalition Reserve Force is moving," the tactical officer reported. On the display, Kothvar could see the remaining Coalition heavy ships advancing from Nexus Station. Admiral Voss's dreadnoughts and battle cruisers were finally entering the fight, but they weren't charging blindly into combat. Instead, they were moving to exploit the gaps and weaknesses that the human attack had created. It was a perfectly executed combination of chaos and order, improvisation and discipline. The humans had shattered his fleet's cohesion and blinded its sensors. Now, the Coalition's heavy hitters were moving in to deliver killing blows to crippled targets. "All ships," Kothvar ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled fury, "fall back to secondary positions. Reform the battle line." But reformation was impossible. His ships were scattered across several light minutes, many were damaged or blind, and the humans showed no intention of allowing an orderly withdrawal. They swarmed around his vessels like angry insects, continuing to strike at critical systems and communication arrays. "Admiral," Sub-Admiral Grek said urgently, "we have a problem. The humans appear to be herding our damaged ships toward the Coalition heavy units." Kothvar looked at the tactical display and felt cold dread settle in his heart. The seemingly chaotic human attacks weren't random at all. They were driving his crippled vessels toward specific positions where Admiral Voss's dreadnoughts waited with heavy weapons charged and ready. It was a trap. An elaborate, brilliantly executed trap disguised as madness. The first of his damaged cruisers stumbled into range of the Coalition battle line and died in a spectacular explosion of plasma fire. Then another. Then 3 more in quick succession. His retreat was becoming a rout as human fighters nipped at the heels of his fleeing ships, driving them toward destruction. "Signal retreat," he ordered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Full withdrawal to the outer system." As his fleet attempted to disengage, Captain Chen's voice once again filled the communication channels. But this time she wasn't talking to her pilots. She was talking directly to him. "Admiral Kothvar, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Independent Navy. I want you to carry a message back to your empire." Kothvar said nothing, but he didn't cut the channel either. "Tell them that humanity has joined this war," Chen continued. "Tell them that we don't fight like anyone they've faced before. Tell them that every world they've conquered, every species they've enslaved, every act of aggression they've committed, we remember all of it." The human captain paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a cold promise that made Kothvar's scales itch. "And tell them that we're coming." As the shattered remnants of his fleet limped away from Nexus Station, Kothvar stared at the tactical display showing the impossible. His force had been reduced by nearly 60%. Hundreds of his finest warships were now debris fields or burning hulks. The invincible Third Conquest fleet had been broken by an enemy that refused to follow the rules of war. For the first time in 3 centuries, a Vorthan fleet had been defeated in open battle. The age of easy conquest was over. The humans had seen to that. Emperor Vexthul of the Vorthan Empire stood before the assembled high command, his obsidian scales reflecting the cold light of the war room's holographic displays. The reports from Admiral Kothvar's defeat at Nexus Station had sent shockwaves through the Empire's military hierarchy. 3 centuries of unbroken victory had ended in a single devastating engagement. "Explain to me," the Emperor said, his voice carrying the deadly calm that preceded executions, "how a scattered force of primitives managed to destroy 60% of our Third Conquest fleet." Admiral Kothvar, his ridge scales dulled with shame, stood at attention before the War Council. "Your Imperial Majesty, the humans fight unlike any species we have encountered. They abandon conventional tactics in favor of chaos and unpredictability. Our standard doctrines proved inadequate." Inadequate. Emperor Vexthul tasted the word like poison. "Our tactics have conquered 300 worlds, Admiral. They have crushed every species that dared oppose us. And you tell me they are inadequate against a single backwater planet?" "The humans have formed an alliance with the Coalition remnants," Grand Admiral Nexus interjected, her ancient voice crackling with barely contained fury. "Intelligence reports indicate they are coordinating a massive counteroffensive. Multiple systems that were under our control have gone silent." The Emperor's mandibles clicked ominously. "Show me." The central hologram shifted to display the galactic map of Vorthon territory. What Emperor Vexthul saw made his blood run cold. Red zones indicating lost contact spread across the outer territories like an infection. Worlds that had been securely under Imperial control for decades were suddenly silent. "How many systems?" he demanded. 47 confirmed losses, reported Intelligence Director Kojatal. Another 23 showing signs of rebellion or insurgent activity. The humans appear to be coordinating with local resistance movements, providing them with weapons, training, and tactical support. Emperor Vex Thul studied the pattern of losses. It wasn't random. The humans were systematically targeting resource-rich systems and strategic choke points. They were cutting supply lines, isolating garrison forces, and turning the Empire's own expansion against itself. "They're using our size against us," he realized aloud. "The Empire is too large to defend every system simultaneously." "Your Majesty," Grand Admiral Nexus said, "I recommend we recall the frontier fleets and consolidate our forces. We can establish a defensive perimeter around the core worlds while we develop new tactics to counter the human threat." "Defensive perimeter?" The Emperor's voice rose to a roar that made every officer in the room flinch. "The Vorthon Empire does not defend. We conquer. We expand. We do not cower behind walls like frightened children." But even as he raged, Emperor Vex Thul knew the truth. For the first time in Imperial history, they were facing an enemy that couldn't be defeated through conventional means. The humans had introduced variables into the equation of war that Vorthon strategists couldn't calculate. A communication alert interrupted his thoughts. The main display shifted to show an incoming transmission on all Imperial frequencies. Captain Sarah Chen's face appeared, but she looked different now. Gone was the excitement from their first encounter. In its place was the cold determination of someone who had seen too much war. "Citizens of the Vorthon Empire," Chen began, "this is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Liberation Fleet. I speak to you today not as an enemy but as a representative of every species your empire has enslaved, every world you have conquered, every life you have destroyed in the name of expansion." Emperor Vex Thul snarled. "Cut the transmission." "We cannot, Your Majesty," the communications officer replied nervously. "They're using some kind of quantum entanglement broadcast. It's reaching every Imperial world simultaneously." Chen continued speaking, her words carrying across the Empire to billions of Vorthon citizens who had never heard their military might questioned. "Your leaders tell you that the Empire brings order to chaos, civilization to barbarian worlds. They tell you that your conquest is noble, that your victims are grateful for Imperial rule. These are lies." Images began appearing alongside Chen's words. Recordings from liberated worlds showing Vorthon occupation forces, work camps, strip mining operations that had scarred entire continents. The Emperor watched in growing horror as humanity broadcast evidence of atrocities that were supposed to remain hidden from the Imperial civilian population. "We have spent months liberating your conquered territories," Chen said. "On every world, we found the same story. Families torn apart, cultures erased, entire species reduced to slave labor for the glory of an empire that sees them as resources to be consumed." "This is Imperial propaganda," Grand Admiral Nexus protested. "Our subjects live better under Imperial rule than they ever did as independents." But the images spoke for themselves. Kalani children separated from their parents and shipped to labor camps. Thaxian warriors forced to mine the metals that would build the ships that conquered their neighbors. Zephyrian scientists compelled to develop weapons for their own oppression. "The age of Vorthon expansion is over," Chen declared. "Not because we have superior numbers or better weapons, but because we represent something your empire cannot understand, the will of free peoples to remain free." The transmission shifted to show fleets of ships emerging from hyperspace around Vorthon worlds. But these weren't just human vessels. Mixed among them were Kalani fighters, Thaxian assault ships, Zephyrian cruisers, the combined forces of every species the Empire had conquered, now united under human coordination. "Every world you took from us, we will take back," Chen continued. "Every species you enslaved, we will liberate. Every act of oppression you committed, we will answer." Emperor Vex Thul watched in fascination and horror as the map updated in real time. Liberation fleets were emerging throughout Imperial space, not in random attacks, but as part of a coordinated campaign that spanned thousands of light years. The humans had done more than win a single battle. They had organized the largest rebellion in galactic history. How? Admiral Kothvar whispered. How did they coordinate all of this without our intelligence networks detecting it? The answer came from Intelligence Director Kojatal, whose voice was hollow with defeat. They used our own communication networks against us. Every Imperial relay station, every quantum beacon we built to connect our territories, the humans turned them into tools of rebellion. They've been broadcasting coded messages to resistance cells for months. Your Imperial Majesty, Chen said, and suddenly she was looking directly at the camera, as if she could see through space to the Imperial throne room. I know you're watching this. I want you to understand something important. She leaned forward, and her green eyes held the weight of humanity's collective anger. This isn't about conquest. This isn't about empire building. This is about justice. Every species you destroyed, every world you poisoned, every child you orphaned, they all deserve better than to live under your boot, and we're going to give it to them. The transmission cut out, leaving the Imperial War Room in stunned silence. Around the galaxy, Liberation fleets were already engaging Vorthon garrison forces. Reports flooded in of Imperial governors surrendering, orbital platforms being captured, entire systems declaring independence. Options? Emperor Vexthul demanded. Grand Admiral Nexus consulted her tactical display. We still have numerical superiority if we consolidate the core fleets. We could make a stand at the Nexus of Thorns, force them to come to us on our terms. And if we lose? Then the Empire falls, Your Majesty. Emperor Vexthul considered this. The Nexus of Thorns was the Imperial Navy's greatest stronghold, a fortress system with automated defenses and enough firepower to sterilize entire fleets. It was also the heart of Imperial manufacturing, the source of the weapons that had maintained Vorthon dominance for 3 centuries. But it was also a single point of failure. If the humans could somehow penetrate those defenses... No, he decided. We will not be trapped in our own fortress. Signal all fleet commanders. We return to our core principle, overwhelming force applied decisively. We will gather every available ship and strike directly at Earth, cut off the head of this rebellion. Your Majesty, Admiral Kothvar said carefully. The humans defeated us even when we had superior numbers. Attacking their home system could be... Could be what, Admiral? Could be our only chance to end this war before it destroys everything we have built? As the Imperial fleet began its final mobilization, Captain Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching reports stream in from across the galaxy. World after world was throwing off the chains of Vorthon rule. Species that had been enemies for centuries were working together under human coordination. The impossible was becoming reality. Captain, her tactical officer reported, long-range sensors are detecting massive Vorthon fleet movements. Looks like they're consolidating everything they have left. Chen nodded. She'd been expecting this. The Vorthon Empire was like a wounded predator, most dangerous when cornered. Their final assault would be devastating, desperate, and aimed directly at Earth. Signal the fleet, she ordered. All ships return to home system. It's time for the final battle. As human vessels began their journey home, they were joined by ships from every liberated world. Kalani fighters flew alongside Thaxian destroyers. Zephyrian cruisers coordinated with coalition battleships. The galaxy's oppressed had become the galaxy's liberators, united by humanity's gift for turning chaos into hope. The war that had been doomed was about to end where it began, with humanity refusing to accept that some fights couldn't be won. The Vorthon Empire had conquered 300 worlds by following the established rules of warfare, but humanity had never been very good at following rules. The final battle would be fought in the space around Earth, where a young species would either prove that freedom was worth any sacrifice or die in the attempt. Either way, the galaxy would remember that some wars are too important to lose, and some enemies too dangerous to be allowed to win. The Age of Empire was ending. The Age of Liberation had begun.